Hello and welcome to the fastest growing channel on YouTube called Actual Justice Warrior. Today, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to start off today's proceedings with a bit of a story, a bit of a scientific experiment. You see, I was watching a YouTube video by another YouTuber that I do not recall the name of, and during the course of that video, they informed me that the unfrosted Pop-Tarts are actually more delicious than their frosted counterpart. And in fact, the unfrosted Pop-Tarts actually have a better mixture and thus have more sugar and are more calories than their frosted counterparts, which would be a bit counterintuitive. So like any great scientist in the world, I decided to go out to the grocery store, buy boxes of the same flavor, put them in the toaster, and taste them and compare them. And the results of this experiment were absolutely stunning because what I found out upon tasting both the frosted and the unfrosted Pop-Tarts was in fact the fact that I don't care for Pop-Tarts very much, and I don't know why I did this experiment. So today, in this video, we're going to go back in time almost a whole week to Cenk Uygur's failed congressional campaign. Now, we covered this campaign from beginning to end, and in the middle too, and during this campaign, there was one moment that shined as Cenk Uygur's employees essentially betraying him, and that was when they decided to form a union and announced their intentions to form a union and TYT declining the union on the morning of the CA25 Candidates Forum, which Cenk Uygur felt like was his first and only attempt to debate Christy Smith. Now, for those of you who are completely unaware about how union drives work in the United States of America, typically, you do not just form a union at your place of employment and create a new and unique union to that job. Typically, you would join a larger union, and the larger union that seemed to be backing the TYT union was called the IASTE, which I may have gotten the letters wrong right there because I didn't bother to look it up before this video, but in case I didn't get it wrong and I nailed it, just assume that I nailed it and I'm that good. But the IASTE is a theatrical production unit, so the people who are trying to unionize at the Young Turks are not necessarily the hosts, they're the people that are behind the scenes. Now look, I'm not going to pretend that it is just a coincidence that on the morning of Cenk Uygur's candidate forum against Christy Smith, which was the first time that he would have the ability to face off against Christy Smith, that the TYT union's parent union, who already endorsed Christy Smith, decided to release all this information about how Cenk is fighting against the union at his own workplace, despite the fact that he claims to be the most progressive. And there's a ton of videos out there online of him being very proud to endorse unions.
Workers want to unionize. They want to say, hey, maybe we'll have more leverage if we all unite. By ourselves, they're just going to fire us and get somebody else to fill the job. But if we're united together, well, that's in a way, part of the marketplace.
But apparently this has been brewing a long time at the Young Turks, and it makes a lot of sense because the Young Turks has been hiring more and more radical left people. And when you start surrounding yourselves with people who don't understand business, people who think that the employer is an innate evil and is against the employees no matter what, people who consider themselves socialists or avowed communists, you can expect a union drive to happen even if the financial situation at the company cannot support a union drive, which we're going to get into their financial situation a little bit later, because I think a lot of people are overestimating the value of the venture capital investments that the Young Turks have received over the past couple of years. But I do think, and this is just my speculation, that there was in fact an inciting incident for this union drive. And I believe the inciting incident for this union drive was the Politicon debate between Cenk Uygur's nephew and Charlie Kirk. And specifically, when Charlie Kirk demanded to know what Cenk Uygur's nephew made in terms of salary on an annual basis.
How much do you make? That wouldn't necessarily even push the needle. I will be very honest. It's really embarrassing, especially because my boss is sitting right there. I make $60,000 a year, okay? And that's a really good salary, but it's not like what Ted Cruz's wife was talking about the other day when she said $174,000 salary a year. It's not like we're gonna buy a second home anytime soon, but that's besides the point, okay? You're trying to attack me, which is ridiculous, like asking me what my salary is. Sure, I'll reveal it willingly.
You brought it up in context. I'm asking,
no,
why don't you live like a socialist?
Okay.
Go live like a socialist.
The point is larger than that, Charlie.
I live like a capitalist every single day, Cenk. I live as a
Hey,
capitalist,
hey,
okay? I live what I believe.
No.
What do I do? I get charity every single year.
Hold on.
What's my salary?
Hold on.
Less than his.
Charlie, take a
Come on,
seat.
Cenk, let's go.
Charlie,
What are you doing?
take a seat.
Now, this clip was very strange. In a mostly civil debate, you had Charlie Kirk get out of his chair, grab a microphone, and start yelling at Cenk Uygur in the audience, and he started screaming iconically, "I live like a capitalist every day," which didn't make a lot of sense. But what always put me off about this incident is why Cenk Uygur, near the end of this debate, seemingly out of nowhere, just started shouting at Charlie Kirk as soon as he asked Cenk Uygur's nephew that question. And then I realized that the reason that Cenk Uygur was freaking out is because his nephew said that he makes $65,000 a year working at the Young Turks. Now, I work in the digital media space. This channel is my primary source of income. I need to produce videos in order to make a living, in order to eat. And I know for a fact that those crummy Facebook videos, those 5-minute long Facebook videos that would also get shared on YouTube, cost next to nothing to produce, but also don't generate a lot of money. And in fact, I would not consider doing that once a week to produce a salary that's worth $65,000. Now, you guys all know I called Cenk Uygur's nephew because the only reason that he is a prominent figure is because he happens to be the nephew of a guy that runs a media corporation. Now look, he managed to use the notoriety that he got from being the nephew of somebody who owns a media company to spin that off into his own Twitch channel. He's not even at the Young Turks anymore, so that's really neither here nor there. But the point I'm trying to make is that anytime you work at these media companies, there's always a bit of a bias financially to the people in front of the camera rather than the people behind the camera. And if Cenk Uygur's nephew is making $65K, that means the people behind the camera that are actually supporting him, that are actually making those crappy 5-minute videos possible, doing the editing, putting in the work, are making nowhere near $65K. And also, the Young Turks is an organization notorious for pleading poverty and asking for fundraising drives. And if Cenk Uygur's nephew, who is basically an irrelevant part of the TYT network, is pulling in $65,000 a year, that means that the other hosts, the more important people, have to at least be making 6-figure salaries. There's no way Cenk Uygur is going to pay his nephew $65K if he's only pulling in $75K. He's clearly making well over $100,000, and that means Anna's making well over $100,000, and that means it is very likely that John Idarola is making well over $100,000. Now, I don't know the working arrangements for the other players at TYT. I don't know if they do a contract basis. I don't know if they just come on. I'm talking about the hosts for appearances here and there, but that's not the point. My point is that the main hosts at the Young Turks are making a very decent living, while it's clear that the people behind the camera are definitely making a lot less. And when they see somebody who is a do-nothing at the company, who has a familial relationship to the boss, making a lot more money than them, that creates a lot of anger and animosity in the company, and that tends to lend support to their union drive. Because if you're working for a company where your boss is always pleading poverty publicly and probably privately, and you're taking less money for a production job than other production jobs in LA would actually pay, and you find out that somebody with a familial connection to the boss is making way more money despite doing 0% of the work, and their work actually being detrimental to the company, you're not going to be happy, and you're going to try to strike back against your employer. Now look, I am largely speculating on what was the inciting incident for the formation of the TYT union, but what I'm looking at is what I'm seeing in the articles from anonymous staffers and trying to align the timeline with something in TYT's history that seems to make a lot of sense. I'm also trying to put myself in the perspective of somebody who works on the production side of TYT and is not making a lot of money, and what would make me angry enough to end up forming a union, and forming a union that intends on sandbagging my employer during his congressional run. Also, Cenk's nephew is not with the company, and it has no relation to the Dan Crenshaw incident, which happened all the way back in August, because he was basically fired from the company in the start of the new year. This makes a lot of sense when you put the pieces together, because Cenk's nephew is a communist, and even though he was handed a job by his uncle, he's made it clear that he supports the unionization drive, and there was this debate between Cenk and his nephew on the Young Turks channel on Cenk's nephew's show Agitprop, where Cenk's nephew tries to convince him on air that not only should he be handed a job, but he should be made part owner, and the Young Turks as a business should convert into a co-op.
And that actually brings us to, I guess, the second point that I wanted to get to in this conversation, which is, if you believe that democracy works in the level of governance, why don't you believe that we can implement democracy in the workplace, especially considering that adults spend 80% of their entire lives inside of these corporations, and these corporations are absolutely authoritarian in its structure.
Yeah.
There is a top-down power structure, and that contributes significantly to alienation.
Now, one of the other problems that Cenk Uygur seems to have with the union forming at his company is that he wants some people that are considered production staff to be listed as managers, because he doesn't think that they should be a part of the union, because he doesn't want their level of pay scale to be incorporated in the union benefits. Which makes a lot of sense when you know that the Young Turks production staff started off with Jesus Godoy and J.R. Jackson. These are people who worked for the company for no pay for 2+ years. Now, Cenk Uygur, I'm sure, treats these people incredibly well now that the company is successful, and he pays them a lot more money than he would pay normal production people, because they believed in the company enough during its infancy to work for the company essentially for free with years on end, with no guarantee of success and no guarantee of pay down the road. And this is where I shock a lot of you in saying that I actually 100% agree with Cenk Uygur. There is no way it makes any sense at all to scale in those people's pay grades, the people who worked for the company for free, the people who believed in the company, with the average Johnny-come-lately employee. That makes absolutely no sense. The producers should not be treated the same as they would be in a union. They should not be scaled in terms of pay the same as they would in a union, because they didn't put in the same effort and they don't produce the same value. Having somebody dedicated to your cause that believes in your vision, that's willing to work for free to support your vision, is way more valuable than a replaceable Johnny-come-lately employee. So in that regard, I'm actually in 100% agreement with Cenk. And overall, with the union drive, I also agree with Cenk that it would be a bad idea for the Young Turks. Now, a lot of people get all excited about the $20 million investment that the Young Turks recently received, but that's an investment. That's not revenue. They expect a return on that investment. They're not giving the Young Turks money based on charity. And one of the big reflections of the fact that they expect a return on that investment was the mass layoffs of nearly half the staff at the Young Turks almost a year after the investment went in. Obviously, they had a lot of underperforming shows on the network, and if you're someone who's investing money in a company, you don't want to lose money on all the employees that the Young Turks tried to hire in order to maximize a return on that investment. And this isn't something that's unique to the Young Turks. We've seen a lot of progressive independent media get venture capital money, have their staff unionize, and then all of a sudden they have to lay off hundreds of employees. Vice is one of the best examples of this, because of all you can say about the $20 million that the Young Turks got, Vice had a partnership with HBO. I believe at one point they were doing 2 series with the company, and yet they still had to lay off like 100 or so employees in the middle of that era when all the digital media companies, especially on the progressive side, were laying off hundreds of employees. These business models are not sustainable, especially with the collapse of ad revenue. Now look, I'm not telling you to feel bad for these progressive media companies. A lot of the collapse of ad revenue can be attributed directly to these very same companies. They're the ones who demanded demonetization on all platforms. They're the ones who supported the mainstream media in this fake news narrative, Russian spying, and decided to get companies like YouTube to direct traffic from independent creators to reliable sources, which just means mainstream media sources. If you ever been watching one of my channels and you remember a time when you used to be suggested one of my next videos on the same topic, but now get suggested a Fox News clip or CNN clip, that's due to YouTube changing their algorithm to satisfy these progressive media people. Because of demonetization and being downgraded in the algorithm, I've essentially had to double my video production output in order to get half the number of impressions, despite the fact that my channel is almost twice as large as it was before this new algorithm kicked in. But I'm a sole proprietor. I don't have any employees. It's just me, this camera, the laptop that I use to edit, and the microphone that I use to capture the sound. If I had employees, like the Young Turks had employees, and I was having my traffic and impressions cut in half, and I needed to ask my employees to produce double just to get about the same amount of revenue, but still slightly less, that would create a lot of problems for me, as it has for the Young Turks, as it has for a lot of online media companies and content creators. So while it is 100% true that Cenk Uygur is a hypocrite, you could just play those compilations of him saying that unionization is actually good for a company, and companies fighting unions are doing so because they're evil, greedy capitalists and they should be ashamed of themselves for doing so. There is a lot of truth in what he's saying. I read that article just like the rest of you, where Cenk Uygur threw down a bunch of papers and was essentially begging his employees not to unionize. And while that is hypocritical against his public stance, as a business person, that makes all the sense in the world. And the fact that he ended up firing the employee that tried to form the union on his first day back from his congressional campaign is absolutely amazing. Because firing an employee or employees because they're trying to form a union is actually illegal under NLRB regulations which Cenk Uygur is a champion of. He advocates for the rules that he is violating right now. And that's not the only thing that Cenk Uygur is doing that's against NLRB regulations. It was recently reported that at the Young Turks, they had their annual pay increases. However, Cenk Uygur decided to give the pay increases to every employee that hasn't publicly stated their intention to join a union, while not giving the pay increases to the people who are advocating for a union. This type of union busting tactics is illegal. Like, you can't do that. You can be fined by the NLRB. But Cenk Uygur is doing it anyway. Now look, I want to be 100% clear. This video is about making fun of Cenk Uygur's hypocrisy on the union issue, not his morality as a businessman. There is nothing immoral about running your company that you founded, that you nurtured to grow over the course of 18 years, in the most efficient way possible in order to make it as successful as it could possibly be. Contrary to what you might hear from BreadTube, Cenk's nephew, or any other internet communist or socialist, the worker is not the key factor in making a business grow. People who accept a job could accept a job at any other company. It's the people who invested in the company, who built it, that deserve to reap the benefits of that company's success. They're the ones who took the risk. They're the ones who invested the capital in the company that won't end up with a return on that investment if things go south. The employees might lose their jobs, but typically they'll get a job at another company doing the same thing. They don't have as much at stake at the company that the employer or the person who invested the money in the company does. This should be a lesson, a teachable moment to progressives online, progressives in media, and progressives in the real world, that unionization isn't this magical formula that just produces sunshine and rainbows. There are significant costs. There might be some benefits, and in some situations, those benefits might outweigh the costs, but sometimes that's just not the case. It's just factually true that the employer or the investors have a lot more at stake and a lot more to lose if the company goes under. And that's why they received the bulk of the rewards when the company succeeded, because they didn't just take a job that somebody else was providing, they took the risk in order to produce something that could be profitable. But those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social medias. If you want to support me, Venmo, PayPal for one-time donations, Patreon Subscribestar for monthly. This has been me talking about the union at TYT. Till next time.